Good afternoon. My name is Heather Harris, and I am a member of the Board of Directors and also the Chair of the Communications and Development Committee for the Alliance for Aging. On behalf of the Alliance for Aging, we welcome you to our third in a series of webinars with the central theme of Living Smarter, Aging Smarter. The topic for today's event is Hurricane Season is Here. Be prepared. So a little background. The Alliance for Aging is one of the numerous area agencies on aging, otherwise called a AAA, in Florida, and the Alliance for Aging is the area agency on aging for Miami-Dade and Monroe counties. We know that disasters can disproportionately impact vulnerable populations, including older adults, persons with disabilities, those with limited income, those with language barriers, and then their loved ones and those who care for them. They may face more significant challenges preparing for and recovering from such events. Therefore, it is crucial that the area agencies on aging, the AAAs, are equipped to support their service population and collaborate with emergency responders in the event of a disaster within their planning and service area. As part of their responsibility to serve older adults and persons with disabilities, AAAs must proactively prepare for disasters, educate their community, and actively participate in disaster assistance activities. While not first responders themselves, AAAs in partnership with the state and community-based organizations have a responsibility to engage and educate elders to help them secure their own safety and well-being during a disaster. By taking these steps, AAAs can play a vital role in mitigating the impact of disasters on vulnerable populations. So the webinar today is going to speak to exactly that, and we are honored to have the following panelists join us for what is sure to be a robust discussion. Our first panelist is Carl Epperson. He is the Emergency Coordinating Officer from the Florida Department of Elder Affairs. We have Tyler Jefferson, who is the Legislative Affairs Director, also from the Florida Department of Elder Affairs. We have Matt Massoud, the Senior Planner for Mass Care and Special Needs at Monroe County Emergency Management. We have Robert Molleda, Warning Coordination Meteorologist from the National Weather Service, NOAA. Jesse Spearo, the Assistant Director of Emergency Management for Miami-Dade County, and Amy Matovina, Florida State Lead for Disaster Work from AARP. We are also honored to have as our distinguished moderator, Susan Holtzman. She is the CEO and President of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, for Miami-Dade County. Thank you to each of you. We look forward to you providing your knowledge and expertise today. We also want to thank AARP for their sponsorship of today's webinar. We are fortunate and we are grateful to AARP for their continued partnership, expertise, and support. Thank you. This webinar will be made available on demand on our website, the Alliance for Aging website, and is currently being aired throughout the United States via the Uniper platform. I hope you enjoyed today's webinar. It is now my pleasure to hand this program over to Susan. Susan, all yours.
Thank you so much, Heather, and welcome everyone to another one of the Alliance for Aging webinars. I'm honored again to be your host. You may notice I have a different title. I have changed jobs. I did work prior in the office of the Mayor of Miami-Dade County, and in that role, I was able to interact with our emergency management department often, and so I'm excited to be able to continue to in this role and specifically with talk about emergency management. So with hurricane season around the corner, we wanted to invite you to a timely, high-level roundtable discussion with local and state leaders on storm preparation, planning, and safety. So we're excited with the experts that we've gathered today. You'll see we have a lot of people and we have a lot to cover. So I want to get right into it. And I want to just remind our panelists, please feel free to jump in. If there's a question I haven't asked that you think people need to know, please feel free to jump in. And one of the things that I did want to point out to our audience, a couple of things really. So here in South Florida, hurricanes are something that we focus on this time of year every year. In other parts of the state, we've had recent situations where people were very seriously affected, and it's happening more often. We know that there are people on the call today who are from possibly other parts of the country, but the idea of being prepared for a disaster is important for everyone. So no matter where you are, no matter what you may encounter, we want you to take what you learned today and apply it to your planning process. And that was the other point I wanted to make. If you've joined us on these other webinars, you know that the word we always come back to is planning. Make a plan. And for hurricane season, it's so important to make a plan. So we're going to get right into it right now, and we'll hear how we can do that. We want to start with Robert. Robert, we understand, we've seen that storms may be getting a little more intense recently, behaving a little differently. Can you give us a little information on that, what you're seeing and what maybe we could expect from hurricanes in coming years that may have been different than in the past?
Yes, hi Susan, good afternoon. Yeah, we have seen over the last, maybe let's say a decade or so. I mean, the time frame is not really, exactly defined, but during the last decade or so, there have been an increase in the number of storms that have reached, higher categories. Let's say, for example, Category 4 or Category 5. Also, we've seen an increase in the number of storms which have gone through what we call rapid intensification, which is, a rapid increase in wind speed over a short period of time. Now, we don't know if this is going to be something that's going to be permanent. It could be cyclical in nature, but I think the bottom line is, regardless of regardless of whether this is going to be a long-term thing or just temporary, it doesn't change the simple fact that Florida is the most vulnerable state to hurricanes. Just our history alone tells us that Florida has been hit by hurricanes more than any other state. So that's why especially Floridians need to be ready every hurricane season. That's certainly not going to change regardless of whatever the other, trends and cycles are.
Great, thank you. And so I guess the next question would be, there are different types of storms. So we've seen the ones here that I've experienced most in Miami are more wind than flooding, but what we saw on the West Coast with Hurricane Ian was more flooding that went way inland. So that's something that we have to be paying attention to, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, hurricanes and tropical storms, and by the way, it doesn't have to be a hurricane in order to, for us to have impacts. Tropical storms and hurricanes bring a variety of hazards, from wind, as you mentioned, to flooding. And it's not just storm surge flooding, it's also rainfall flooding too. So flooding can come in two different ways, storm surge and rainfall. And by the way, the water aspect is the most deadly. Historically, 9 out of 10 people in hurricanes in the United States have died as a result of the water, instead of any other hazard. So we have those hazards, and we have tornadoes too, which can occur, especially in the outer rain bands of these tropical systems. So yeah, it's very important that we're mindful of the fact that these tropical systems are multi-hazard events. In other words, not just about one aspect of the storm.
Great, good to know, really good to know. And Tyler, let's move over to you. Can you tell us how important is it to have a plan, and what elements should a plan for older adults specifically include?
I mean, here at the Department of Elder Affairs, we think the most important thing you can do is plan ahead. Because once the storm is on its way, it's hard to kind of scramble, get all your documents together, get everything together, figure out where you're going to go, what's going to be a safe area, things like that. But we recommend that older Floridians, if they have medical conditions, pre-register for a special needs shelter. If you have medical conditions that require you to have power. And in Florida, it's good to plan ahead, especially because if you lose power, like to Robert's point from earlier, I mean, a tropical storm that came through here a while back, Hermine, knocked our power out for a week. I mean, 7 straight days without power. And, you know, in Florida, it gets real hot around hurricane season. So it's important to know where you're going to go. Another thing we recommend is having a go kit or a go bag that has all your important documents, all your things that you're going to need, you know, have your medications ready to load in that so you can just hit the road and go. And, you know, work with your AAA, know what shelters are in your area. When the storm's on its way, you know, reach out and see if they can help you if you can't get there on your own. So, but yeah, getting ready ahead of time, being prepared is the most important thing.
Thank you. And so, Jesse, can you tell us what are some of the things community members need to do to be prepared? Like specifically, what should they do to be prepared?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Susan. So we always ask our residents and visitors here to beautiful Southeast Florida to take the steps necessary to be prepared. And as it was stated before, having that plan is very important. But what is in that plan? Knowing where your evacuation centers are, knowing your contacts for your emergencies, having call trees. If your cell phone goes out, it dies, doesn't have enough battery charge on it. Do you know or remember the phone numbers for your important contacts? That's a big thing. Where back in the day when we didn't have cell phones in our pockets all the time, most of us memorized important numbers. Now today, a lot of people can't, you know, even know their siblings' numbers by heart or their parents or family members. So having that list on another source, like written down in a Ziploc bag is very important as well. So that's another example of how you can plan and prepare. Knowing evacuation routes is also very important as well as numerous ways to get out of impacted areas that are under threat as well. It's important to have that part of your plan as well. Building a kit is important, but what do you put in that kit? So there's all sorts of things that you can actually cobble up around your house to have in a box or a case or a bag that you can put in there, from flashlights with extra batteries to non-perishable foods. You can have canned goods in there. If you can, make sure they're pop-top cans, or you have a manual can opener. That's very important. Don't have the plug-in one. I've heard people tell me stories about how they had canned foods, but they put an electric can opener in there, or they didn't have a can opener. Having your medication, knowing what your medication is as well is very important. Having a list written down as to what that is. Also being able to identify like what your access to your insurance information, having that information. Also, it's important to have be informed. So where do you get your information from? It should be from trusted sources. We have social media today, and there's all sorts of information on there. And not all of it is good, useful, accurate information. We have information, misinformation, and disinformation today. So make sure you know what your trusted sources are. NWS, our National Weather Service, there are partners there that they push out those official notices. We from Emergency Management here in Miami-Dade County and the mayor's office push out those official notifications and information to our residents as well. Your local law enforcement, fire rescue, your local news channels, those are your trusted sources, and that's what you should be turning towards. And then I also want to add to that, a big important part of that is getting involved with your community. There's lots of organizations that can not only help provide you with skills and training, but they can help empower you to be more disaster ready and resilient for when we are exposed to these tropical threats. One of those I'll just mention real quickly is our Community Emergency Response Team. Our CERT program is a great program here in Miami-Dade County, just like it is across the state and across the country. It's a great way to learn a lot of skills to help get yourself prepared and more disaster resistant and resilient for the future.
Well, that's very interesting. I hadn't thought about that. People having the opportunity to volunteer and get involved. Very important point I think that you mentioned is we cannot depend on cell phones during and after a storm, because once the power goes out, we experienced this way back with I think Wilma and Katrina. Cell phones didn't work. They did not work after that. You couldn't charge them. They wouldn't stay charged. It didn't work. So writing down your list of contacts, writing down your meds, writing down your insurance information is really important. you know, and it's, we don't think that way. I thought, well, I'll just take a picture of it. But if my phone isn't working and the picture's on my phone, and that's not really going to help me, I'm going to hold something up over my face. So, but I want to show this to everyone. There we go. Okay, so we have this publication. It came in the mail to me. It comes every year, and I don't read it. But this year I did in preparation for this call, because I think I've lived here for 30 years, get batteries, fill the bathtub, you know, whatever. But I'm at a different point in my life right now. I'm older. I have different concerns. And so I read it this time. The Miami-Dade County version is in English, Spanish, and Creole. And it has most of the information that we're talking about right now and more. It's extremely helpful. So if you're in Miami-Dade County, I strongly suggest that you actually read this. And then Matt, I wanted to ask you, you're in Monroe County, and Monroe County handles that printed information a little differently. Can you tell us about that?
Sure, Susan. We use one of our local publishers, Keys Weekly. They put together an annual hurricane preparedness guide, and it comes out usually in their first issue in June. And that's a partnership between us here at Emergency Management, our Tourist Development Council, and Keys Weekly.
Great. So, and I'm sure in other parts of the state, there are other ways that this information is published, but if having something printed is helpful to you, then you want to find out where that is. And you can find that out probably. You can also look at the websites prior to the storm, but they're not going to help you during the storm, because as soon as the electricity goes, which is like one of the first things, then we don't have access to that. Matt, was there anything you wanted to add to what Jesse said regarding planning and prep?
I think Jesse said it all. The important thing to remember is, while special needs shelters do exist, they need to really be your plan B or your plan C. There's no replacement for a good plan of your own. No one knows your situation better than you do, or your caregivers, your family, or your primary care physicians, home health care. Those are the folks you want to reach out to start working on a plan and figure out where you're going to go and what you're going to need to do. Notice comes quickly sometimes. So it's not always a situation where you're going to have a 7-day forecast that says, okay, now's the time to think about what I'm going to do for hurricane such and such name. If Michael taught us anything, things change very rapidly, and you may not have so much lead time to make a plan up. So having one that works and having options within that plan are also very important. If you live in South Florida, you may want to have an East Coast and West Coast solution.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. And Robert, if we could go back to you, we talked about having this plan, East and West Coast, and we're starting to talk about evacuating. Can we ask you, as a storm approaches, from your point of view, what are the factors to consider in whether to evacuate or shelter in place during a hurricane?
Yeah, this is a really, really important point. I mean, I think that at the top of our individual hurricane plans should be being able to answer the question, do I live in an evacuation zone? If I do, then I need to know, or at least have a good idea of where are we going to spend the storm? Where am I going to go? Because you may be ordered to evacuate if you're in an evacuation zone. So that's first and foremost. And of course, the evacuation zones are determined based on the storm surge threat. At least, in the vast majority of cases, it's based on the threat of storm surge. So certainly very important that we know that, and then plan appropriately. I know, I'm not an emergency manager, so I don't want to speak for folks like Jesse and Matt here, but I mean, I always hear from them, and I of course agree that, we don't necessarily have to evacuate a long distance. It could be, depending on where you are in the state. And of course, depending on where you are, it could be different. If you're in the Keys, you do have to evacuate quite a ways. But if you're, let's say, in other parts of Florida or maybe other parts of the country, you may only have to evacuate, maybe tens of miles to get outside of outside of that storm surge zone, outside of an evacuation zone. It could be a family or a family member or a friend's house. Again, that's something that ahead of time we should plan for, and then implement it in case a storm comes and our area is ordered to evacuate.
And as you pointed out before, it's not always storm surge that you have to worry about. Flooding can happen from rainfall. So if you live in an area that is prone to flooding, or recently has been prone to flooding, because we're seeing more of that, or as we saw with Hurricane Ian, the flooding took place way in state. So I think that would be something to consider. If you live in an area that's prone to flooding and maybe not storm surge, it still should be part of your evacuation decision.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, our evacuations, are in other words, we should heed evacuation orders that are issued by local officials. So that that's I think that's very important, or probably of utmost importance. Yes, we have to be familiar with our area's vulnerabilities to storms, whether it's from storm surge or, as you mentioned, even in inland areas. Inland areas can still be vulnerable to rainfall flooding. So you have to be aware of that vulnerability as well. So yeah, it's important, to have a good idea what potential hazards from hurricanes could directly affect your home, your neighborhood, and plan appropriately in conjunction with orders and decisions made by local officials.
Absolutely. And we would want to reiterate that if you live in an evacuation zone and you've been told to evacuate, the recommendation is evacuate. Do what is safest for you, your family, your pets, and evacuate. Amy, I wanted to go back to you. I know that in your work with AARP, you've seen a lot of what happens in different communities. So I wanted to take that a little bit from a resident's point of view. If I were a resident and I'm thinking, okay, what factors should I consider about when I should evacuate, and when do I need to make that decision? When would it be too late to change my mind?
Perfect. Thank you so much for asking me that. Yes, if you are going to stay behind when the storm is upon you, the roads will be closed. It will probably be too late to change your mind. County officials generally give a timeline and a deadline when they call for an evacuation, so please follow those guidelines. Once the storm is too close, they will not be able to send emergency responders out to help you, as it will endanger the responders. Our advice is to watch the hurricane updates at least once a day, and if one is forming, then watch it twice a day, so you are aware of the latest information and you can be informed on a decision to leave or stay in your home. If you do stay, make sure your family, friends, and neighbors know your decision. Our recommendation, or my recommendation in my family, is let someone out of state know your decision as well, so that way they can monitor it too. If everyone evacuates from near you, then that could be a problem because everyone scatters. We always let someone else out of state, like Kentucky, know where we're going and where we're going to be, so that way they know we're safe. And that way, if family members need to know where we are, they know to contact that particular person. If you do stay, please make sure that your family, your neighbors know as well, so that way they can check on you, and that way you know where they are. The most important thing that you can do is make a plan and stick with that scenario, depending on what type of storm it is, and decide now what your best options would be. When the storm comes, stick to that plan that you made. It may be easy to panic at the moment, but if you've already made a well thought out plan, then consider your specific situation and trust that plan.
That is great advice. That is great advice. And I love the idea of letting people know what your plan is. I can tell you, the first real storm I experienced after moving to South Florida was Hurricane Andrew. And I worked at Baptist Hospital at the time. And so many of the calls, I was there during the storm because I was 9 months pregnant. And after the storm, I was there answering the phones. And so many of the calls that we got were people looking for their families because they had no idea where they had evacuated to, if they had evacuated. And so it was employees, families looking for them. So it's so important to let people know where you are and what you're going to be doing. let me just go back to, oh, I apologize. Matt, I wanted to ask you again, Monroe County, like many areas in Florida, is truly isolated from the mainland. It's very easy to get, there's not a lot of routes in and out, and same with, for example, Miami Beach and other barrier islands on the West Coast. So I wanted to ask you, tell us about how, is evacuating harder from that kind of a situation, and how will residents know when to evacuate if they live in a barrier island kind of situation?
Yes, it is most certainly more difficult when you have essentially one road in and one road out. And that's the same road each direction. So you have one road. We have to start earlier. We have to be proactive. One of our first things we will do is call for an evacuation of tourists, people that are living in mobile home parks, RV parks, or live aboard vessels. And those are the most vulnerable populations. So we want to make sure those are evacuated, at least from a built environment is concerned. Those are very vulnerable. So we get those folks out, and then we start with our residential evacuation of special needs persons immediately after that. And we're trying to make sure that we are on land a good full 24 hours prior to an expected landfall. It is a phased evacuation. Depending on which way the storm is coming from and what the predicted impacts are, we have 126 miles to take into consideration. So we will phase the evacuation. We have split the Keys into 5 different evacuation zones, and we will go accordingly to make sure that we don't have any log jams, roadblocks, or the like on the way out, or if something should arise, we have enough time to clear the road and get people going. From time to time, we have to consider shelter in place for a no notice event, or if our one and only road should shut down. And that's a scary moment for everybody. But we do have general population shelters along the way and special needs shelters in county. We always want to be one category or one level of storm above what's predicted, though. So for our special need folks, we will evacuate to the mainland for category 2. Our general population, once we hit category 3, it is a mandatory evacuation for all of Monroe County. And those orders are given with enough time to not only be ahead of landfall, but be ahead of gale force winds to where it's too dangerous to travel if you're in a large profile vehicle. So, we're looking at the 35 mile an hour to 45 mile an hour arrival time, planning backwards from there. And getting the word out is difficult. Word does travel fast, but unfortunately that is occluded by hearsay, rumor, and conjecture. And getting the correct message out, we just encourage everyone to focus on reputable news sources, as was previously mentioned. Social media, if you're going to rely on social media, go directly to Monroe County Emergency Management's page. Go directly to Monroe County Sheriff, or whichever your local jurisdiction has. We have notification apps that are very popular as well. We have one called Alert Monroe. It's very easy to sign up for. You go to our website, monroecountyem.com, and you could subscribe to mobile phone alerts. Our sheriff's office has a mobile alert system as well, as does our schools and various other governmental organizations. Getting your weather from the right source is important as well. We're fortunate enough that we have a weather station here in Key West. Not every community gets to brag about that, but between Miami and Key West, the Keys are pretty well covered when it comes to quick information. So if you're seeing it published, you're seeing weather published on one of those official outlets, you can guarantee it's the freshest and best and greatest information we have. Aside from waiting for an evacuation order, expect one to come. Be prepared. The technology that the Weather Service has now gives us far more notice than we've ever had in the past. So there really is, in most instances, there's a reasonable amount of time to make those preparations. Also, if you feel uncomfortable, don't wait for an evacuation order to arise. There's nothing that says you have to wait for that to happen. As long as you know where you're going, that's the important part. We have sayings that say you hide from the wind, you run from the water. Well, here in the Keys, as Robert pointed out, if you drive 15 miles inland, you're on the other side of an island. So that's not really going to help you out, or you might already be underwater for that matter. So yeah, we do have to evacuate to the mainland, but where you're going there doesn't mean you have to go all the way to Georgia. You can find places in Orlando, South Florida, as long as they're in a relatively safe area and you're not evacuating to another evacuation zone. So being ready for that means keeping your gas tank with enough gas to get to the mainland. There's always a rush on the pumps whenever a storm is predicted to come through. So you don't want to wait to the last minute on that. Same thing goes for your provisions with your water, emergency food, that sort of thing. The grocery stores are going to take a beating. Being in a barrier island doesn't mean you get trucks every day like a mainland outlet would have. You're not near a warehouse. So our grocery stores can't just order an extra truck. The chances are the items that are here today were ordered 2 or 3 weeks ago before we even knew a storm was coming. So we can't readily get restocked when you're isolated. The same thing goes if you plan to travel by air. Chances are those flights are already booked, the outgoing flights. And if we're expecting a storm, don't expect to see too many incoming flights that are going to be coming in to pick people up either. So, it's you want to make sure that you have a few avenues to escape when you're in a barrier, and avenue is probably the wrong word there. You want to make sure you have a few methods to escape, and you want to make sure you're staying ahead of that wave of people that are coming out. By staying ahead of the game, you ensure that you have at least a hotel and a reasonable driving distance to go to. You are able to get fuel, you are able to get food, and you are able to get peace of mind knowing that where you are now is safer than had you waited. I know sometimes finances get in the way of being able to just pull up stakes and go and get in hotel rooms. So that's another thing to prepare for. Make sure you have a good reserve of your own. You have that emergency credit card, whatever the case may be. Make sure you're putting aside enough resources of all kinds for an evacuation.
Thanks. Thank you. And Jesse, did you want to add to that? I think I hadn't really thought about that too, but do our barrier islands here in Miami-Dade County evacuate earlier? Do you recommend earlier evacuation, for example, for Key Biscayne and Miami Beach?
Yeah, that's a great question. What we do is we don't make that decision in a silo. So we make that decision in cooperation with our partners from the National Weather Service. We got Robert on speed dial. We're hitting them up early, often, and hard. We have a member of the National Weather Service that sits in our Emergency Operations Center as well. Our mayor and emergency management director, this whole team is communicating with our barrier islands, those elected officials, those emergency managers. They know what the conditions are and what our approach should be when it comes to evacuation orders, and we time those together. So we're not going to make a decision and then all of a sudden announce, okay, we're evacuating zones 1, and that includes XYZ communities, without properly coordinating with them, knowing what their capacity is, knowing what possible census is on their islands or within those jurisdictions at that time. We also, one of the things we don't do is we don't do evacuations at night. That's just a very dangerous operation to do that. So when the evacuation orders are given, it's done during daylight hours because that's the safest time for people to initiate their travel, at least their initial travel. And we communicate that out through our official channels, through the news media, and we let people know what zones are going to be identified as evacuating. And as has been stated, we're not asking people to evacuate because of the wind. We're asking people to evacuate because of the potential surge. That's the biggest impact, the biggest danger that we see from that. We'll also issue evacuation orders for those that live in mobile homes, or those that have houseboats, or those that are in substandard housing. And as Matt indicated, we don't want people to go hundreds of miles away or tens of miles away. We want you to stay as local as possible. Have these plans to go stay with some family or friends that are perhaps more inland or an adjacent county, or move over to Southwest Florida if that's an opportunity for them to get to some folks over there, or to have some travel plans to book somewhere else. I don't tell people specifically where to go as an emergency manager. I just identify to them to get out of the way of the hazards that they may see. But I also say that, you know what, it is middle of October, it's high peak hurricane season. We got something coming, Orlando might be a nice place to be and visit, Mickey Mouse. So those are some of the options that are out there. But obviously, we don't make these decisions in a silo, and the Keys with Monroe County and Palm Beach County and Broward County, we also as a county don't make that decision just on our own. We communicate with those regional partners, because what we do in Miami-Dade County is going to directly impact Monroe County, Broward County, as well as Palm Beach County.
True, and that's something I think a lot of us don't really think about, how, the county line doesn't divide what's happening, certainly not in the weather, and certainly not in the traffic. If people are evacuating from the Keys and going north, then that's going to impact traffic all the way up through the state, picking up more people. So let me ask Tyler and CJ, we've talked about evacuation now, and we have a large population, as we know, of older adults in the state of Florida. And not all of these people have family here. So if older adults need to evacuate, they don't have family or friends to stay with that are relatively close by, what should they do? What are the options for them? Where can they go? Is there any, if they're trying to make a plan right now, besides make some new friends or make up with family, maybe, that what can they do in the state, around the state of Florida, to find a place to evacuate to?
So we have a bunch of resources that we offer. First, we published the Digital Disaster Resource Guide that we put on our website. And we also have our biannual newspaper, which our AAAs distribute, and it has information that's helpful. We also share resources before, during, and after the storms online and on our social media. We also have our elder helpline, where we can answer any questions like that, which is 1-800-96-ELDER. It is available during business hours to connect seniors with resources. And also one of our newer programs, and this can be coordinated through the department if seniors need a volunteer. They're called the Hope Heroes, and they're managed by us. And when a storm hits, they can go out and, before the storm, they can load sandbags and deliver meals. And I know the AAAs also distribute shelf-stable meals in those situations. But, as far as if it's too late and you need help now or help finding somewhere to go, any of these resources can be helpful.
Great, thank you. And so let me ask Jesse, I know in Miami-Dade County we do have a list for people who are homebound, and can you tell us about that, how it works, how people can get on that list?
Yes, so Miami-Dade County has what's known as the Emergency and Evacuation Assistance Program, the EEAP. So this program is designed to help those that have a physical issue that prevents them from evacuating out of their area. So we have some conditions with this that allows them to actually get transportation to an emergency shelter, and then they can have medical assistance to help support them as well. The conditions associated with this are that they're unable to evacuate on their own due to they need specialized transportation. Another one is they're homebound and they're unable to walk to an emergency bus pickup site to get transported to a shelter, and they don't have anyone that can take them to a shelter. They're bedbound. They are on life-sustaining medical equipment that requires electricity. Another parameter is Do you have medical needs that actually prevent you from evacuating on your own? And then that last condition is, do you require assistance for daily living? So if you have any of those boxes that you check on that, you qualify for this program and you get on our EAP list. And what we do is we contact you a couple of times in the year just to make sure that your information is correct, accurate, and up to date, that you haven't moved out of the area. And what we do prior to the landfall, if we're threatened by a tropical system, we actually will call you up to ask if you need assistance. Do you need any help? Also, we follow up with you afterwards as well to see if there's any unmet needs that you may have as well if you decided not to evacuate as well. So to order to enroll into this program, you can simply go to the Miami-Dade Emergency Management website and complete the form, the EEAP form. Also, if you're in Miami-Dade County, you can simply call up 311 and then they will send a form out to you directly as well. So it's a good opportunity for you to not only learn more information and access it online, but we have call takers at 311 in Miami-Dade County to also assist in that program as well.
Great, thanks so much. And Matt, is there anything similar in Monroe?
You're probably not
County?
going to let me off the hook just by simply saying ditto.
Okay.
We have a very similar program, but for us, we call it our Special Needs Registry.
Okay.
And to sign up for that, visit monroecountyem.com. Up in the top banner, you'll see a logo for, the typical ADA wheelchair logo. You click on that. There you'll find all the information for the program, the releases, what to do with your pets and such. And then you could register for the Special Needs Registry. And just as Miami-Dade does, we do routine updates. We exercise with our call down. We call it the call down team. They're the volunteers we use our medical reserve corps. So we're making sure we have medical professionals that are actually making the phone calls so that if there's anything that needs to be addressed or concerned, we can get a quick answer when we do our updates. And I do have to be very thankful to Miami-Dade County and Miami-Dade EM because they're very, very generous to share their facilities with us, because when we have to evacuate Monroe County, that's where we have to go. We make a great team. So it only makes sense that our programs mirror each other.
Absolutely, Matt, I'll add to that as well. And I'll also throw a shout out for Florida International University, which serves as one of those host sites for Monroe County residents as well, in particular with special needs. There's also one caveat to this program, Susan, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong with Monroe County as well. If you are a resident of an assisted living facility, you don't qualify for this program because those facilities have their own emergency management plans in place to help those that are in those facilities as well.
Yes, that's correct. And it even goes beyond just assisted living facilities. Any resident programs that offer case management are required by federal and state law to come up with a alternative housing solution and evacuation plan. So that includes group homes, adult care facilities for disabled adults. If it's a mental health facility with resident inpatient care, hospitals, nursing homes, assisted living facilities, special needs shelters are not the place for them. And the reason for that is it comes down to logistics is what it really comes down to. If you have a known population that requires special care during the time of an evacuation, then it's your responsibility to come up with a plan for the known. Whereas the county, we're kind of looking at the known unknowns. We know there's people out there, we just don't know who they are until they register. And a big part of getting on that registry is to make sure, and this is something that we do here, is that when we review plans for the different types of agencies that provide care, we examine those plans to make sure there's a segment in their welcome aboard packet that includes the special needs registry. So those are home health care agencies, pharmacies, durable medical equipment providers, primary care. We want to make sure that those are all points of access. And our website is set up in such a way that anybody with any electronic device could register another person, hopefully with their knowledge. Sometimes people sign people up and don't say, hey, mom, you're on the registry now. And so when we make that phone call, there's a little confusion. But aside from that, there's multiple avenues to be included on our registry. And while, we don't do the old fashioned hard copy, fill out the form, send it in, there's no reason why we can't find a place for you to have intake, even if someone comes to your home, or you even give me a call over the phone. We can do an intake that way. The important thing is that when you're having people fill out the form, you want firsthand information as much as possible. Like I said before, nobody knows you better than you. So when you fill out that application, you're reading those questions, you're giving the most accurate and honest answer for that point in time. And then you want to make sure you're keeping that updated. And we remind you about when it's time to update it.
Thank you. So this point about we want to avoid confusion. We don't, when we have a storm approaching, there's so many teams mobilized and so much happening. So you want to, again, we go back to make your plan early, know where you as a resident fit in all of this so that you know what to do. And as Amy said, then don't change your plan, follow your plan. So where we are in my mind, I'm trying to go through this chronologically. So a storm's coming. I don't have family or friends to go to. It's clear that I'm at a point where evacuation is going to be my step, and I'm going to make the choice because I don't have another choice to evacuate to a temporary shelter. So, and we want to remind everyone, these are temporary shelters. These are, as we said, we're pulling people together to put them in a safe place. So we want to talk a little bit about what can you expect when you go to a shelter? What do you need to bring specifically? And how long do you think you'll stay there? So actually, I'm not sure who I want to hit with this question. Does anyone want to jump in? And because I know there's a lot of different thoughts on that. Matt, go ahead.
Speaking at least for the folks of Monroe County, which is pretty standard across the state of Florida, as far as I know, what to expect at a shelter. A special needs shelter, you're going to have 60 square feet allocated to you, everything you bring, and your caregiver. You as the registrant, the patient, the client, whichever consumer, whichever you want to call it.
Let me just ask you, a special needs shelter, can you define that?
Yes. So a special needs shelter, the purpose of a special needs shelter by statute is to provide auxiliary power for people that are medically dependent for electrical equipment. They're on supplemental oxygen. They have cognitive or behavioral disabilities. And then there's a few gray areas as to what is considered available through your county. So while there is a state form of guidelines, each county individually makes adjustments. So for instance, one county may have the ability to put dialysis patients in their special needs shelter because those arrangements can be made for them, while other counties cannot. Some counties could take people who have oxygen at 3 liters per minute or less. Others could go up to 10. It all depends on what's available to where you plan to evacuate to. So there's no hard and fast way to say this is what the special needs is, no matter where I live in the state of Florida. You want to make sure that if you have multiple homes or you move around the country or the state, that you're checking in to make sure you meet the specifics of that jurisdiction or that community.
Understood. Okay. And Jesse, as far as what to expect if you don't need to go to a special needs shelter, but you have a pet.
Yeah, that's another area as well. So some counties require that you register your pets ahead of time. Some counties do not. I'll speak to the generalities of shelters as well, and a little bit about expectation management as well. So the shelters are there to provide a safe space until the disaster subsides and it's clear to go back to the area that's been impacted. These shelters are lifeboats, they're not cruise ships. So there's no all you can drink pass. There's no free, sunbathing on the deck. No, that doesn't exist. But what exists is a safe space. We have law enforcement personnel there. We have case management there. We have shelter workers there. So it's a nice a safe space to be. You're going to want to bring your supplies that you can carry in that is going to keep you there for probably about a minimum of 3 days. We always say about 3 days is about that time frame, but it could last longer depending on the severity of the incident as well. We could have like an incident like Hurricane Dorian a couple years ago, which for Florida turned into Exercise Dorian because unfortunately it sat over the Bahamas, but then it ended up going offshore for us. But we were activated here in South Florida and much of the state for many days on end. And that sat over the Bahamas. And, that's a situation that could also happen down here in South Florida as well. We could have one of those circumstances. We could have a Hurricane Harvey scenario also occur, and the same type of circumstances could also evolve from that as well. So we asked that people bring some of their basic provisions, some bedding material, their clothes, their personal documents, cell phone chargers. If you have children as well, make sure that you have things to keep the kids occupied and keep them busy during that time frame as well. Also, if you have a pet, make sure that you have appropriate food and water for those. Those pets are typically sequestered to their own area, so you need to bring a carrier case for that. And there's limitations as to the type of pets that you can bring in there. We're asking that people don't bring in their pet iguanas or their pet snakes or their pet zebras or whatever you have it. So it's typically confined to a very small section that's allowed within these shelters, and they have to be in those cases, those kennels as well. So once again, our shelters are designed to keep people safe. It's designed to provide them that opportunity to pass the storm out and then return to the residents afterwards.
Well, I love that analogy. It's a lifeboat, not a cruise ship. So again, make a plan, because this shelter is not going to be the most comfortable place for you to go. It's going to be a safe place, but not the most comfortable place. And if you have a pet, if you have children, you can imagine that scenario wouldn't be that comfortable. But if you don't have somewhere else to go, certainly go to the safest place that you can, which would be a temporary shelter. So let me ask Tyler, CJ, and Amy. Now we're the storm. We weathered the storm in the shelter. We've survived it, and now we're looking at, okay, what happens for me next? What in your experience, what have you seen, and what does the Department of Elder Affairs offer? What does AARP and the various agencies offer, specifically to older adults who are experiencing the aftermath of a storm?
So from the Department of Elder Affairs, our primary function is to stay in touch with the AAAs and providers and make sure they're able to operate and relay any absolutely, need it right now needs to the State Emergency Operations Center. And statewide, our providers help clients prepare for storms by providing them with, like I said earlier, shelf-stable meals, offering to get them to shelters and calling to check in on them before and after the storm. CJ and I are the emergency operations coordinators, and we work with the Emergency Operations Center to get needs met. CJ does the long shifts. He does the 12-hour shifts, or at least he was during Ian, and I would sub in a couple of days a week. So because he was on 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. So but did a great job during Ian. But it's tough work over there, and those people work very, very long hours. From our secretary, she likes to advocate on behalf of the Aging Network to get them special resources with the governor's office, and several providers that were, for example, affected by Hurricane Ian received funds from the Florida Disaster Fund. So we just kind of reach for anything we can get for our providers and our AAAs, and just trying to help in any way we can from Tallahassee.
And Amy?
Yes. So after the last storm, after Ian hit, down the Sarasota, Manatee, Bradenton area. We gathered up our resources and we went down there and we provided things like pizzas to a senior housing facility that did not have enough food for their folks. We provided simple things like Q-tips. We provided some paper towels. We provided some things that we could buy here that they could not get there, maybe a loaf of bread. They needed some bread. So we were able to get materials. I'm actually in Pinellas County. We're actually able to get materials here that they could not get and that they could not go out to get. So our staff, we have about 23 of us. We took specific days and we went down to help them out as much as we could. We had a pizza party next door to a laundromat. We went into the laundromat and handed out our brochures that we have. And sorry, there you go. And we also were able to give a few folks some laundry detergent as well if they didn't have any that they brought with them or they could not have it available. So we were able to help them that way so that they would have clean clothes, because it was about 2 weeks without without power. So
very helpful, very helpful. So we're just about out of time. I think if we can, I don't know if I have time for this. I think stay safe is our major message. Have a plan. Have a plan for safety, and a plan for safety is not, oh, I'm going to wait and see how bad it's going to get. The plan is, if it's bad, this is where I'm going, this is what I'm doing, so that we stay safe. Monitor your emergency management office communications in whatever way that you can, and reach out to the Alliance for Aging here locally to find information before and after the storm to support you on that. Does anyone have anything else they really want to add? I think we're about out of time.
I just want to say, don't be afraid to reach out to your local EMs. And if you have any questions, now's the time to get them answered.
And
Yeah,
I
Susan, if I may, just really quick, and make
Go ahead,
sure
Robert.
that when we have any type of potential bad weather threatening our area, we see a lot of there's watches and warnings being sent out by the National Weather Service and of course relayed by emergency managers and local media. Pay attention to those. Those are really important, especially when it comes to hurricanes. Those watches and warnings are those are the risk communication tools that we have in order to let you know what your threat is from that storm, and then the watch and warning gives you the appropriate time frame and level of action that you should be taking.
Thank you so much, Robert. And thank you, all of you. I have to say, this is a really impressive group of people that we have on this webinar. And so in our audience, you have heard this from the experts. This is the best information and advice you can get in the state of Florida. So please heed it. And we look forward to seeing you all next time. Thank all of you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
thank you.